December 26, 1900. A ship arrives at a remote Scottish island. The crew climbs 160 steps to a lighthouse perched on jagged cliffs. When they open the door, they find a kitchen table set for a meal that was never eaten. The clock on the wall has stopped, and all 3 lighthouse keepers have vanished without a trace. Their bodies were never found, and what happened that December night remains one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in maritime history. The Flannan Isles sit 20 miles off the western coast of Scotland, in the cold waters of the Outer Hebrides. For centuries, local shepherds called Unburied the largest island, the other country. They would bring their sheep to graze during the day, but never, ever stay the night. The island had a reputation. Stories passed down through generations spoke of spirits that haunted the rocky shores, of strange sounds echoing across the cliffs when no one was there. The shepherds respected these warnings. They knew better than to ignore them. But in 1899, the Northern Lighthouse Board didn't concern themselves with local superstitions. They needed a lighthouse on Unburied. Ships crossing the Atlantic relied on these beacons to navigate safely through treacherous waters. Construction was brutal. Every single stone, every piece of equipment had to be hauled up 148-foot cliffs directly from supply boats. Workers built a cable railway just to transport materials. The lighthouse cost nearly £2,000, a fortune at the time. But by December 7, 1899, the Flannan Isles Lighthouse was operational. Its beam cut through the darkness, warning ships of the deadly rock below. The lighthouse was manned by rotating crews of 3 keepers. In December 1900, those keepers were James Duckett, the principal keeper, a veteran lighthouse operator, experienced and dependable. He had a wife and 4 children waiting for him back home. Thomas Marshall, the second assistant, 20 years of maritime experience. He knew the sea. He respected it. Donald MacArthur, the occasional keeper, filling in for another man on sick leave. MacArthur had a reputation. He was known as a brawler on the mainland, a big man with a short temper, but he was competent at his job. These weren't amateurs. These were professionals who understood the dangers of their isolated post. On the night of December 15th, 1900, the steamship Archdor was making its way across the Atlantic from Philadelphia to Scotland. As it passed the Flannan Isles around midnight, the crew noticed something wrong. The lighthouse beam was dark. The captain made a note in the ship's log. When the Archdor docked in Lee 3 days later, on December 18th, he reported the incident to the Northern Lighthouse Board. But nothing happened immediately. The relief vessel, a lighthouse tender called Hesperus, was already scheduled to visit the island on December 20th. They would investigate then. But a storm delayed the journey. The Hesperus couldn't leave port. For 6 more days, the Flannan Isles Lighthouse remained dark. Finally, on Boxing Day, December 26th, the weather cleared enough for Captain James Harvey to make the crossing. On board was Joseph Moore, a relief keeper who had worked at Flannan before. He was coming back for another rotation. As the Hesperus approached the island, Captain Harvey sounded the ship's horn. Protocol dictated that keepers would respond to the signal, preparing to meet the relief vessel. Harvey fired a rocket flare into the sky, a backup signal impossible to miss. Still nothing. The ship docked at the eastern landing. Moore stared up at the lighthouse. Perched high on the cliff, the flagpole was empty. No flag had been raised. The usual supply boxes that keepers left on the landing platform for restocking were nowhere to be seen. Something was very wrong. Joseph Moore climbed the 160 stone steps alone. Each footfall echoed against the rock face. The wind howled around him. When he reached the compound gate, he found it closed. The main door to the lighthouse was shut tight. He pushed it open. Inside, the scene was frozen in time. The kitchen clock had stopped. The table was set for a meal, plates, utensils, food that had long gone cold. A chair was overturned, as if someone had stood up quickly and never returned. The beds were unmade. In a corner, a canary sat in its cage, the only living thing on the island. Moore moved through the rooms methodically, his dread growing with each empty space. He checked the lamp room at the top of the lighthouse. The lamps had been cleaned and refilled. They were ready to be lit. Everything was in order. The work had been completed, but the keepers were gone. Moore ran back down to the landing and signaled the Hesperus. Captain Harvey sent 2 more sailors ashore. They conducted a thorough search, looking for anything that might explain what happened. They found one critical detail: 2 oilskin coats, weatherproof gear the keepers wore in storms, were missing, but a 3rd coat still hung on its hook. This meant 2 men had gone outside in their protective gear, but the 3rd man had left without his coat, in December, on an exposed island in the North Atlantic. No lighthouse keeper would do that willingly. On December 26, Captain Harvey sent a telegram to the Northern Lighthouse Board. It read, "A dreadful accident has happened at Flannan's. The 3 keepers, Duckett, Marshall, and the Occasional, have disappeared from the island. The clocks were stopped, and other signs indicated that the accident must have happened about a week ago. Poor fellows, they must have been blown over the cliffs or drowned trying to secure a crane. Moore and 3 volunteer seamen were left behind to maintain the light, while an official investigation began." Robert Muirhead, superintendent of the Northern Lighthouse Board, arrived on the island on December 29th. He knew all 3 missing men personally. He had recruited them himself. Just 3 weeks earlier, on December 7th, Muirhead had visited the lighthouse during a routine inspection. He had been the last person to shake their hands. Now he was investigating their disappearance. Muirhead examined the lighthouse log meticulously. The last official entry was dated December 13th. Routine weather observations. Nothing unusual. But on a slate board used for temporary notes, there were weather readings for the morning of December 15th. Wind speed, barometer readings, temperature. The notes indicated the keepers had completed their morning duties that day. This meant they disappeared sometime in the afternoon of December 15th. Muirhead and his team searched the island thoroughly. The eastern landing, where the Hesperus had docked, showed no signs of damage. But the western landing told a different story. Storm damage reached as high as 200 feet above sea level. Iron railings were bent and twisted. A railway track used to haul supplies had been ripped from its concrete foundation. A wooden storage box that sat 108 feet above the water had been smashed open, its contents scattered across the rocks. The evidence painted a picture. A massive storm had hammered the western side of the island. Waves of extraordinary size and force had surged up the cliff face, destroying equipment that should have been well above the danger zone. Muir had examined the oilskin coat that had been left behind. He determined it belonged to Donald MacArthur. This meant Duckett and Marshall had gone out wearing their protective gear, likely to secure equipment at the Western Landing. But why had MacArthur gone with them without his coat? In his official report, Muir had concluded, "I am of the opinion that Duckett and Marshall had gone down to the proximity of the West Landing to secure the box with the mooring ropes, and that MacArthur, seeing the distress signal for assistance, had rushed out without his coat to help. An unexpectedly large roller came up on the island, and a large body of water swept them away with resistless force." Case closed. A tragic accident. 3 experienced men caught off guard by a rogue wave. But Muirhead's explanation left questions unanswered. The official verdict was drowning by misadventure. But as word of the disappearance spread, people began asking uncomfortable questions. Why would all 3 men go to the Western Landing? Lighthouse regulations strictly forbade leaving the light unattended. At least one keeper had to remain inside at all times. It was the most sacred rule of lighthouse operation. And what about the storm? The Arch Store had passed the island at midnight on December 15th and noted the light was already extinguished, but there were no reports of severe weather in the area that day. The entries on the slate indicated the morning had been routine, wind, yes, but nothing catastrophic. If the men died in the afternoon of the 15th, as the evidence suggested, what storm were they trying to secure equipment against? In the years following the disaster, rumors began to circulate about strange entries in the lighthouse log. Supposedly, Thomas Marshall had written about an unprecedented storm on December 12th, about James Duckett being unusually quiet, about Donald MacArthur, the tough, hardened brawler, weeping in fear. A final entry, allegedly written on December 15th, read, "Storm ended, sea calm. God is over all." If such an entry existed, it would change everything. It would mean at least one man had survived the afternoon of the 15th and written in a log afterward. It would mean the official timeline was wrong. But when investigators tried to verify these log entries, they found nothing. The supposed entries didn't exist in the official records. They had been fabricated, added to the story years later by newspapers looking to sensationalize an already mysterious event. The real log contained no such drama, just routine observations ending on December 13th. Without concrete answers, speculation ran wild. Newspapers across Britain and beyond published increasingly outlandish theories. A sea serpent had devoured the men. A ghost ship, the legendary Phantom of the Seven Hunters, had appeared and spirited them away. Foreign spies had abducted them. The men had staged their own disappearance to escape their isolated lives. MacArthur had murdered the other 2 in a rage and then thrown himself off the cliffs. None of these theories had evidence, but they filled the void left by unanswered questions. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse still stands today. It was automated in 1971 and no longer requires human keepers. The island remains uninhabited except for seabirds and the ghosts of speculation that refuse to die. James Duckett left behind a wife and 4 children, Louisa, Robert, Annabella, and Arthur. They never learned what happened to their father. Thomas Marshall was unmarried. His father, brother, and sister waited in vain for news. Donald MacArthur had a wife and 2 children who spent the rest of their lives wondering what took him from them. The official explanation, that 3 experienced men were swept away by a rogue wave, is plausible. The western landing showed clear evidence of massive storm damage. Waves reaching 200 feet above sea level could absolutely kill, but it requires accepting that all 3 men violated their most sacred rule, that they abandoned the lighthouse simultaneously, that MacArthur rushed out without protective gear into conditions dangerous enough to warrant securing equipment. Perhaps that's what happened. Perhaps it was simply a terrible accident, a perfect storm of poor decisions and worse luck. Or perhaps, on that cold December afternoon in 1900, something else happened on Eileanmore, something that left behind only questions, a stopped clock, and an empty island haunted by silence. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse Mystery remains unsolved to this day, and the 3 men who disappeared have never been found.